this video, we're going to discuss whether you need art education or don't, like me.
Well, I first did art at college, so I did A-level art, and then I did a foundation degree, which is like a 1-year course at college. And then I went off to university, to Winchester School of Art, to do art and study that. As you know, Debs, some of the people might know as well, I did textile design at university rather than a fine art degree, which is something I do kind of regret not doing at university. But yeah, I mean, my experience was I spent 3 years at university, and yeah, I've probably got quite a lot of insight that I can share into that experience, I suppose.
I would say that's like fairly traditional how you imagine you going into a profession. Just briefly, why is it that you chose textiles, not art and fine art, and then we'll go into your experiences?
I think at the time it felt like textile design was a more viable route for me. I thought if I could get a degree in design rather than art, it would be an easier way into a creative career. So it was like I thought it'd be easier to get a job at the end of it. Turns out it wasn't for me. I've come back to art anyway. But so that's why I chose textile design rather than fine art.
But did you find that from your foundation that the textiles drew you as well?
Yeah, it did a little bit, because in my foundation year, I enjoyed using a lot of different materials. I enjoyed things like glass making and ceramics, and even in my paintings, I was particularly interested in kind of texture and the aesthetics of a painting. Although you might be surprised to know that I didn't really attend that many of the textile design lessons during my foundation.
I'm a little surprised. Yeah.
It was quite like, this is what you do step by step, and that didn't really interest me at the time. But I was interested in textiles still, and particularly in printmaking as well. I did like printmaking. So I decided to go down the textile print route when I did do that.
And that's interesting, because I think if you look at some of your paintings, I think you can see that influence.
It's definitely informed my paintings now, so I probably shouldn't really regret it, because it's given me a different kind of way of painting and things to think about in terms of design as well, and colour probably.
What do you think you'd have gained, because you used the term regret, from the fine art side of things? What do you feel you've missed, and what do you think that you got? Because I think you can see some of the influences, so you can see that you've gained from having that art education.
I think the main thing I would have gained is to be able to practice painting around other painters, and had kind of feedback from lecturers and students and things like that, and been able to sort of progress my painting, and that probably would have expedited what I'm doing now. Well, I think it would. It might not have. And the thing is about university is that quite often when you do get feedback, particularly from your lecturers, quite often it can be very intellectual. So thinking back, they seem to prioritise the kind of the intellectual critique of art, which I think is quite a traditional. You used to have art critiques that would be more in tune with, well, what does this mean in terms of art history and those sorts of things. And it's very much an intellectual rigour, rather than what I've found now is more useful for me is to think about, well, it's what we're all about, it's tapping into intuition, being authentic and those sorts of things. So that could have been taken away from me if I chose to do painting at university, because it could have been critiqued in such a way that it would have actually found it harder to find my creative voice.
Yeah, because I wonder if it's different now. I think it possibly is. No? Do you not think so?
No. Sadly, I've spoken to a recent graduate who went to Aberdeen, and it's still very much... I think the thing is the lecturers as well, all of this is caveated by it depends where you go and it depends who your lecturers are and all of that
Exactly.
stuff. So it's personal experience. I can't speak for everybody, but quite often the lecturers that are at sort of university style sort of status as lecturers are more embroiled in the education system rather than the art world system.
Right, okay. Yeah. And it's to do with curriculum and to do with that side of things. Yeah. That's what you're trying to say, isn't it? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do get that. Okay. Yeah. I had quite a different experience because obviously I didn't do art, but I'm thinking about my education because I went to Open University. I wasn't very well in my 30s, 40s, and it meant that it was the university that was available to me, but I was really pleased that I did that because firstly I was doing music, just to make it clear I wasn't doing art, and I wanted to learn more about music, and it was, in a way, it wasn't because I wanted a career, it was just because I was interested. I wanted to expand my knowledge, and we did... Some of the courses were music technology and very sciencey based, and some were like history, and it was a humanities degree. But when I ran out of the more traditional courses, I had to choose some courses that weren't music because I'd done all the music courses and they didn't do a whole 360 points of music courses. So I then thought, well, what do I want to do? And they'd got creative writing. And they were new courses. And what I mean by that is creative writing wasn't taught traditionally. Mm-hmm. And so I think that possibly made a difference. But the difference between what you're talking about, which is curriculum and comparing it to history, etc., don't get me wrong, we did do a bit of that. But the courses that I took were very much teaching you creativity. Which is more about teaching who you are, your authentic self. It was really interesting because that has really fueled me. So I was going to say that I've never done, and before this, I was going to say I haven't actually done any art education, but I think I'm wrong. I think I have. Yeah. Because when we did creative writing, what they did is, the first thing we did, we walked into, because you did still have a bit of bricks and mortar, like coming into, it was only once a month or something, once a week the first year. But so you did still have contact. And some of the first exercises that they gave you were write in free flow. Don't do any punctuations, 20 minutes of just writing. So we did have inspiration of, you had to think about something and you might do a flowchart to get ideas, and then you'd just write and write and write, and you'd pick out the gold later and then you'd edit. But the ideas, they taught you how to get ideas together. And actually, when I start to think about it, that's how I work now. I collect ideas, I take those ideas and I try and put them into paintings. And I'm even trying to take it a step further where I do the free flow. That's my process, my new process, rather than planning it out. I mean, they also taught you how to write an essay, which is very planned and all that side of things as well. And we definitely did history, and that was a bit more traditional humanities. But I was very, very impressed at this learning, and this is how I still think. So I think in terms of, you do the creative part and the intuitive part, and then you edit. And that's really obvious to anybody. I think it's really obvious that if you're writing something, you'd get your ideas onto paper and then you edit them. You'd do that if you were doing even an essay or something, wouldn't you? You'd collect your ideas together. And I do that the same with art. So I like the idea that you do the creative bit, the intuitive bit, and I separate it out in my head. And when I actually stopped doing the courses, I went back to art because I hadn't had much time when I was doing those courses, and I just was doing it as a hobby really, and I found I could paint so much better, and it was all about not just creativity. A big thing was about observation, because when we were writing poetry, we were paying attention to what was surrounding you and to your own inspiration, and obviously that's more about your authentic self. So that is so interesting, because before we started this, so I've gone on a bit, but it's because it suddenly dawned on me that I have done some art in education.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And it sounds like it definitely opened the door for you to think that art was something that you could do, because you already had a bit of a process and an idea of how to tackle it as well. Yeah,
but I didn't think of it at the time. I just started to paint. I went to classes again, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I can paint so much better. So it was like it improved my technique as well, or maybe confidence, or I don't know. It did help for certain. And then I started playing with things, materials, and that's how I really started. So it's fascinating, really.
I do think the way that you describe it, your experience at the Open University, is actually more in line with my experience when I was at college, so when I did my foundation year and when I did my A-levels. And maybe that's just to do with the kind of the tiered education system, potentially, in the UK and how they evaluate things. But there was definitely during the foundation year, you were taught how to be creative and how to tap intuition and all of that kind of stuff, as well as learning technical techniques as well. So we do
playing with materials, which is also important, isn't it?
And having a variety of materials to use and things like that, and just having. But it was like the conversations were far more informal at college that I'd have with my lecturers, and it would just open up your imagination a bit more about what you were doing and why you were doing it, whereas it was a lot more structured at university, where you'd have like group critiques, which could be quite intimidating really, where you'd have everyone, you'd have another 20-30 students around you, and you'd kind of be presenting what you were doing and then be critiqued in front of everybody. So that was quite tough actually at that age, if I think back.
Yeah, we did do critiques. We were taught to critique. And what I mean by that is they taught us to critique in a positive way. But we didn't have, obviously you got critiques from your tutor, but that was more private. But we had forums, because obviously it's Open University, so it was more online. And what they did was they encouraged you to do a lot of critiques on other people. And that was open, and they taught you how. It was really good actually, because they taught you how to whether to take it on board or not. So they taught you the fact that you always put positive to what is working about this, what's good, and you put what could be improved. So those were the things, and there was like almost a formula of how you actually analyse something, which to make it constructive. And then they also taught you about the fact that you need to not always listen to people. So they literally, this was lessons about how to actually do it, which I thought was very impressive, really. But they also said sometimes you need to get over yourself if lots of people are actually critiquing and saying that something's wrong.
It was interesting to hear your experience of critiques, because I think that's the right way that you should do it, to have it as like a constructive feedback session where people are given guidance on exactly how to critique. We didn't have that at university at all. And it was like a free-for-all. So it could feel a bit savage sometimes. And there's also a part of me that thinks there's a bit of a difference between creative writing and what makes a good art piece as well, because I think art can be a bit more subjective, whereas something like writing probably has a few more rules in place. So if you, for example, if you make a piece of artwork that's really controversial and people don't like it, that doesn't mean that it's not good. In fact, that could mean that it's really good. Because
Yeah, I would say that exactly the same happens with writing as well, because sometimes you don't really like somebody's writing. So I'm not saying, I can get why you think it might be different because you're thinking in terms of grammar and stuff, but sometimes people just didn't connect to somebody's writing.
Understand the subject or their perspective or something.
Bear in mind that some of the stuff we were doing was poetry.
Yeah, I do think it's quite interesting to think about, though, isn't it? Like the value of a critique in something that can be very subjective as well. Because I suppose that was the other thing about how art's assessed. It's always going to be very subjective as to whether somebody likes your work or not.
Absolutely.
And that can totally change your experience with the lecturers that you've got, because if you don't have that sort of connection with them, you only had one main lecturer at university per subject, so it wasn't like the same experience I had at foundation, where I had a photography lecturer, a textiles, a 3D design. All these different lecturers would then feed into your dialogue with them. Whereas at university you'd have one main lecturer in that subject, and if you didn't quite gel, it then becomes quite difficult to kind of get what you need, probably from each other, probably from their experience as well, you know?
Yeah, and that's really interesting, because that's saying that sometimes it's going to be really difficult to connect, because if you were looking for a coach, you would look for a coach that you connected with.
Yes, yeah, or a therapist, or Yeah.
And if it didn't work, you'd change them, wouldn't you?
You could change, whereas you don't have that option at university.
Well, you don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not something that I had thought about, but I do think that's particularly important if you're trying to learn creativity.
Yes.
Because, as we've discovered, it's all about being authentic to yourself. So if you're actually learning from somebody who doesn't even understand you, that's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, because you're not going to be able to get to that point where you can really open up and be vulnerable and then do the creative work that you need to do, because,
Although I do think a good lecturer should be able to provide exercises to open up that creativity, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Even if they
should be able
don't
to
agree
guide
with
you
you.
in the right direction and those sorts of things, but it doesn't always. And I think the other thing about university is you don't learn as much as people might assume, because it's a lot of self-directed study. So you're given an assignment and you're just kind of expected to get on with it and research the topic yourself and those sorts of things. So in terms of education, we only had one lecture a week at art school. So you don't get that much kind of fed to you, as you'd imagine.
Did you get like art history though? Because you've got quite a lot of interest in artists and artist inspiration. That was more you.
That was me. Yeah, I got more of that from college when I was doing foundation and A-levels, and more from like one-to-one chats with tutors there about different artists and those sorts of things. And also I was fortunate as well when I was younger that my dad's got an interest in art, so we went to galleries and we had conversations about artists and that sort of thing. So it's definitely something that was more organic, I suppose, in my experience.
That is fortunate, because I think that's not always the case.
No, I know that's quite a unique thing. A lot of children, never set foot in a gallery, but I was very lucky that way. Yeah. And we've got a really nice, Walsall Art Gallery is really good. It's got like Van Gogh and things in there, so very lucky in that sense.
I spent a lot of time in libraries.
Yeah,
I did.
Can see that.
Maybe that's why I write. And I used to love poetry. So it's very interesting, because I still think that it's knocked on to what's happening now. But
definitely, you can see that.
Yeah,
I think there's also, I had quite a bit of a cultural shock, I think, when I went to university. So I'm from very much like a working class town in Walsall, which is in the Black Country in the West Midlands, and It's it's quite deprived in a lot of areas, and I suppose doing art was probably something that was seen as to be really kind of out there, you know, compared to other people that would kind of get jobs in traditional trades or retail or something like that. So when I went to university, Winchester's a very affluent area. It's just outside of London, and it's kind of used as a commuter town into London. But, you know, rent prices and everything are super high, and it does attract a certain kind of person. So when I went from Warsaw feeling like I was kind of breaking the mould by doing art, and then down to Winchester in the south of England, where people couldn't understand me because of my accent, which I never thought was that strong.
I don't think it's that strong, but yeah.
And the type of person also that goes to university to study art, generally speaking, is, you know, upper middle class to upper class. So when I think back to university, say of a class of about 30 people, there was only about a third of us that actually had to work to get jobs as well as be at university at the same time. And I think that's probably, I mean, we're going to come on to the kind of the perception of the arts in the education system in a bit, but that's probably because it's seen as like a luxury thing to study, because perhaps it's not going to go anywhere and perhaps it's not going to get you a job. So it's not necessarily something that families from different backgrounds want to spend money on for their child's education, to go to university to do art. I was really fortunate in the fact that my dad saw the value of art, and he always did, and he saw my creativity, so he encouraged me to go to university to study something creative. But yeah, I mean, the girls that I went to university with were just, I felt like I was on a different planet to them, to be honest. You know, very working class versus the rest of the people that I lived with didn't have to work. They didn't really have to think about money, you know. So it was totally different culture, which probably made me feel a little bit alienated as well during university. I did find my crowd and found my people and had a great time socially in the end, but initially it was a big culture shock for me as well.
Yeah, and you must have learnt quite a lot from that though as well.
I did.
Because
Dealing with different kinds of people and different situations and different perspectives, and I probably learned how to articulate myself more. I probably learned who I am as a person as well, and what my values are and what's important to me.
And how different people in different situations think differently as well, because I think they do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And it probably gave me a little bit of a push to be like, there's not enough people in the art world coming from a working class background with my perspective, so I want to be one of those people and take up more space, actually, is, you know, how I felt, which is not a bad thing.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, I think there's lots more women now.
Yeah.
But, you know, women, if you think about it, when I was starting work in the 80s, women were fighting to work, weren't they? You know, 70s, 80s.
Yeah.
And then we realised we had to do it all. It's like it has changed quite a lot, actually, over time.
Yeah.
So, that's another story. It's definitely another story, that one. We are going to talk about it at some point, aren't we?
Yeah. What might surprise you at university as well is that there's very little men there. There was about one guy to every 20 girls. So the guys had a great time there. But yeah, there weren't many men there. I
did sciences at A-level, you probably don't know, but very few women in the sciences.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. I did physics, chemistry and biology. It's so different to this, isn't it? So different to the art, but that was my background. I was much more, and I think there was lots of girls in biology, lots more than men, and there was 2 in chemistry and 1 in physics. That was me. Interesting. I think there was quite a lot in maths, so it's so definitely are differences, and I wonder if it's similar now. I'm not sure.
I mean, most of the guys resided in sculpture, building things, and so that's quite sort of stereotypical, isn't it?
Yes, but I think there's a lot of male artists, isn't there?
Well, I think
Well known.
Yeah, it comes
That's what I mean.
down more to. I think it's starting to change, which I think is a good thing. But I think because the art world kind of not that long ago used to be run by men with money, I think it's just perpetuated that cycle where more men have then got into galleries and had careers. And of course, with women as well, any kind of career is generally always a bit more challenging with childcare and those sorts of things. So yeah, there's quite a lot to think about there. But I think
there is.
I think in terms of practicing artists, I think there's just as many women as there are men. It's just maybe you've not always got the same opportunities, or traditionally it's always been a man's world, really, hasn't it? So if you were to go around an art gallery, it would be full of famous male artists and there'd be very little female art on the world. Now, I think that is changing. Naturally, galleries are making more of an effort to get women's work on the wall and people from different ethnicities as well.
Most definitely, yeah.
But it comes back to that whole thing that you can't be what you don't see either. So if you're a little girl growing up in the world and you're seeing lots of men's work on the walls, you might quite naturally think it's not a space for me, subconsciously,
without even realising it.
Yeah. Same with different sciences and those sorts of things, isn't it? That's traditionally been more of a male pursuit, or certainly been outwardly
and
perceived
engineering and that sort of thing. Yeah,
so if we go back to like the whole thing around different culture around art university and the type of people that I suppose have the courage or the support of their family to go and study art education, I think that probably comes back to what we perceive as the value of art education or anything creative versus doing a more traditional subject like engineering. What do you think?
I think, do you know what? I've realised I haven't really thought about it, which is really a bit strange. But what I mean is, I didn't do an art education, and so I haven't really thought about how people perceive an art education. What I have thought about is how people perceive you if you've not had an art education.
Okay, yeah. That's
which is very different, isn't it?
Yeah, so I suppose the other thing that's brought this to my attention is when people speak about their children going to university and what subjects they're going to choose and that sort of thing. And also the general support and perception that's put around achievement whilst children are at school. So I've got some, not direct family, but there's family out in Australia, and their two children went through the school education system. The lad was always very academic and good at maths and sciences and politics and law and those sorts of things. And that was always like really, really like cheered on. Oh, he's done this, he's got this grade. And whereas the female of the family was more into theatre and creative studies and those sorts of things. And I just felt like it was less champion, like it was like, oh yeah, she likes doing this and that's great. But it wasn't seen as a big accolade as it would if somebody was getting good grades in maths. And actually,
I can see that in a way. Yeah.
And actually, I felt sorry for her at one point because they were sending her to a maths class on a Saturday because she wasn't naturally good at maths. She just didn't. I mean, I sat down, I did her homework for her sometimes because I was like, I can imagine how that would have felt at that age, being me more creative. I would have just, it would have driven me bonkers. But the point is, there's no way they would have done that with, the lad in the family because he's not good at creative stuff. So we're going to send him to an art class every Saturday until he gets good at it.
No.
Because it's not seen as an essential skill. It's seen as something that's nice to have, something that's a bit interesting, but it's not part of your formal education system.
Yeah, and the other thing that I thought is quite interesting and really surprised me, because as part of this video, I'm thinking that there's people who are out there who are going to think, I haven't had an art education, but I want to be an artist. So that's the other side of the coin, the flip side. And when I started doing village hall classes, and it was only because I got interested in playing with materials and people were asking me how to do it, and I just thought, you know what, there's so many people asking me, I could open a class here, which is what I did. So it just sort of happened, really. But I used to think, gosh, I'm not an art teacher, I'm not an artist, you know, what am I doing, really, to be honest? And I used to tell people that as well. So sometimes people would, you know, because I was quite open, and people would say, you know, where have you learned, where have you trained, whatever. And I'm like, oh, I'm just like messing about, really, and then teaching you. That's what I do. And they used to be, you must be so talented, Ben, right? And that actually, again, you know, we did that is talent a myth thing, the episode, I think it's episode 2. It sort of takes away the art education again, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's great for me because people actually think you must be an amazing artist if you can do it without education.
Yeah.
They don't realise that actually, when you say self-taught, you are teaching yourself a lot. And you are going to classes or learning from online or doing stuff. You're not just sort of magically born with a paintbrush in your hand. Maybe there's the odd genius, but you know, generally that doesn't happen. Yeah. And I also felt that we discussed it earlier that other life experiences feed into it as well. But it's just a thought. It's just a thought that if you're wanting to actually be an artist and you want to do it, and you've not got an art education and you can't go back to education, don't let it stop you.
No,
people will think you're amazing because you're doing it anyway, and that's just like, it's sort of a bit mind-boggling, isn't it, when you think about it?
Yeah, and the other thing is that there's so many ways to learn now as well that you don't need to do 3 years of university, which is outside of some people's reach financially as well. You can do classes.
But what I'm saying is, if you were becoming a doctor, a scientist, whatever, you'd still have to do the education, wouldn't you?
Yes, you would.
That's what I'm trying to say. Yeah. I'm not saying, it's just that's different.
Yeah.
Isn't
it is, definitely.
I think this brings us on very nicely to, we were asked, I think very early on, because we always put a little comment to say, if you want us to talk about anything, then let us know. And I can't remember who it was, but we were asked, and we did put it on our list, to discuss STEM versus STEAM.
Yeah.
And it really brings us on to that. So we're fulfilling our promise to discuss this.
Yeah. We should probably start with people that don't know what STEM stands for.
That would, yeah.
Yeah, so if anybody doesn't know what because it's an acronym, isn't it? STEM stands for, correct me if I'm wrong, Debbie, we might need to Google this just to double check.
Yeah, we might do. Or you Google it. We'll just talk about it.
I think it bunches together the subjects of science, technology, engineering and maths.
Okay, do you want me to look it up?
Should we check?
Yeah, we'll check.
Because it'd be embarrassing
we'll
if
do
we
the
got that
Googling.
wrong.
Yeah, it would.
Should really know with my IT.
Yeah, so from what you think as well, is that STEAM means, and I'll just,
basically you're adding arts in there, aren't you?
Yeah. STEM is a common abbreviation for 4 closely connected areas of study: science, technology, engineering and mathematics. Yeah, STEAM represents STEM plus the arts, and the arts being humanities, language, arts, dance, drama, music, visual arts, design and new media. So all of that.
There's a lot more in there, isn't there, as well?
Yeah.
I think.
Yes. Yeah. So traditionally, although we had art classes and, you know, it was always, there was a lot of STEM, wasn't there?
Yeah.
In education,
in
generally.
school in general. And it was very focused on, I suppose the core subjects would be kind of English, science, maths, and then everything beyond that was kind of additional, or like the subjects that you chose when you got to a certain grade at school, didn't you? You could choose your humanities and your, whether you wanted to do design or woodwork and those sorts of things. So it definitely wasn't part of the core education, was it, in terms of like adding creativity into those subjects, which I think what STEAM tries to, the idea around it is that creativity should sit amongst these subjects in terms of, I suppose, adding something extra. I suppose it's like problem solving, isn't it? And those sorts of things.
The way I think of it is that having the arts way of thinking, which is the creative way of thinking, makes you, if you can creatively process a problem, then that's when new ideas come. So that's equally as valid to somebody who is engineering as it is to somebody who's in the arts or you know, a scientist or anybody who's using innovative thinking. You would think creativity is a bonus. And we also have discussed it before, feel quite strongly that creativity is something that everybody has. It's the way that it's our formative playing. We were creative in our play.
Yeah.
That's how we learnt about the world. And to take that away within the education system, personally,
I think it's criminal. That's actually how I feel about it. I think it's awful.
There we go. Yeah. We actually think
got on a rant now.
There we go. So
I'm just going to put it out there.
Our opinion is STEAM all the way.
Yeah. I think it's really needed. And I think we're at a point in the world as well where it's like we've got loads of big problems to solve with the environment. We've got outdated political systems. We've got financial systems that don't work anymore. So more than ever, we really need creative thinking around all of this stuff because the world is far, far more complex than it ever used to be and far more interconnected as well. So we really need more creative thinkers out there. And actually, if you think back to people, Einstein is always fascinating to me because he said imagination is more important than knowledge. And you would think that you always associate kind of science with that kind of logical thinking, don't you?
You do. However, the real ideas scientists, the innovators,
that's the difference.
We're always creative thinkers. If you listen, and the creative process, it doesn't matter whether it's art or whether it's engineering or it's very, very similar. When you actually look at in fact, it's the same. It's just a process. It is a process. So if you think about it, even things like, you know, the aha moments, you know, Newton with the apple and the, you know, is it Archimedes in the bath? Sorry. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? It's like, So they tell you about all these things, about what happened to all these amazing scientists, and then don't teach you the skills of the creativity. That just seems a bit of a strange thing to do. I
was just going to say, the thing is as well, it's something that you can teach, and it's actually your brain and your neurons and everything that's going on between connecting the creative side to the logical side. There's actually a physical change in your brain when that happens, and you're able to problem solve differently and better if you engage that creative side of your brain with the logical, intellectual side of your brain. So
absolutely,
something that we can all do, and it's something that we can all benefit from. So I don't know why we're not teaching it in schools.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because obviously you could tell that Ruth and I feel quite strongly about this. But I was watching a podcast earlier, and it was about they were talking about neurodivergence and the fact that some people who are ADHD and how they can actually think, they're almost like the real jack of all trades of thinkers. Yeah. But that can be I mean, what are we expected to do with business? We're expected to run a business, particularly in this day and age. Even as artists, you're not just expected to be an artist, you're expected to have all these different hats.
That's so true.
And sometimes, depending on how you think, that can be perfect for somebody who has a difference in the way that they think. Yeah. And it does feel like the education system has historically been designed for one type of brain, almost, for one type of thinking.
And one type of learning, isn't it? And kind of personality.
One type of learning.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And then some people don't fit into that at all.
Most people don't, do they? Probably about 80% of people don't fit into that.
No, so you almost need to individualise. What I found interesting is I went into science and we did physics and they did a Nuffield system. And it was actually, my physics teacher said that because I was very, very good at learning, as in the traditional way of learning. And I could pass an exam and then just forget what was in the exam. I just was quite good at that.
Yeah.
But I probably wasn't as creative when I was younger. Yeah. It's interesting because, and he said that when I was doing physics, that I might not do as well as if I was doing a traditional system, I was doing a Nuffield system, because I didn't have that creative side, which I thought was quite interesting because obviously I do.
Yeah. Yeah, it just wasn't brought out at school because it wasn't there, or, you know.
No.
And I also think a lot of the things that you find interesting at school also depends on how the teacher teaches the subject as well. So I think they can actually kind of kick off your imagination if they explain it in such a way that's like, you know, engaging. And
often you don't see the links between what you're being taught and the real world, do you?
No. I think that's what used to frustrate me at school, and like it just felt like you were having to memorise stuff just to pass an exam, and it's like, what the heck is the point in that? I mean, I love subjects as well, like English at school, that was more like, you know, studying Shakespeare and that kind of thing. I really enjoyed law at college, believe it or not. I had a really good teacher for that, and I liked the whole picking apart a debate and analysing things, and that's probably more on the intellectual side of things, but I enjoyed that as well because it was interesting. But the other thing that I was thinking about is obviously what we've got in common is our work history, with us both working in IT as well, which was an interesting experience coming into IT. I kind of accidentally fell into it. But the one thing that I really enjoyed was the problem solving aspect of it. So I started off on a help desk, and that was all. People would just call up with their IT problems and you'd have to diagnose them and then talk them through the fix.
Yeah, me too. Yep.
And I really enjoyed that because that was quite, that way of thinking to me was more abstract. You had to look at the whole problem because someone might call you up and say, my mouse isn't working. Well, you'd then have to communicate with them to work out, is their mouse not plugged in? Do they mean that they can see the mouse, but it's not acting like it should? And it was more like a process of like having to communicate with them to work out what was going on, and then think, okay, I'll do this as a fix, or we'll try this, or we'll try that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed that part of IT, and I think that's where I probably excelled in my career in IT, was my ability to think about things differently. So it comes back to that creative problem solving and using both sides of your brain.
Yeah, and I think for I was in IT when people were just starting using the internet and not really understanding anything, email or whatever, and you're having to also have that computer-human interaction and understanding how they're actually seeing it as well.
Yeah, so you're trying to see it from their perspective.
Yeah, it very interesting, and I'm pretty sure that that's fed us as well, hasn't it? It's quite, but that was a lot, because I did programming and it was a lot of logic. There was a lot of logic there. But there's logic, and then you can make your program complex or simple. And sometimes the simplistic ideas were thinking outside the box. So that's quite interesting as well. But I don't know whether people agree. Be interesting to see whether, if put things in the comments if you agree or don't agree with us, because it's difficult to know exactly what the education system is now. You would hope it has a little bit more steam in it. It does appear to do than from when I was at school.
Yeah, I hope so, but I'm not very optimistic about that either.
Yeah, Ruth's 15 years younger than me, so that's quite interesting to see the differences, because you think it's changed a lot in that time, and then it hasn't changed as much as you think. But then you think, well, the children at school now are a lot younger than you too, Ruth. Yeah. So it's like,
yeah. But I think the problem for me is that the whole education is very much results driven in terms of exams, and then there's obviously they score them based off that, don't they? So how do you measure? It's more about the quality experience rather than the statistics of what exam results you come out with. It's like creating a well-rounded person at the end of it. I don't think you can measure that with exams.
No, and I think that they certainly haven't got anywhere near to looking at people as individuals and almost this almost tailoring it to you. I know it appears like they do that, because when you're older you choose, but it's not quite like that. That's not quite what we mean. It's more like looking at almost how the personality is going to learn. It's like it's
I think
it's got to be better than it was.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at different countries as well, they have different ways of teaching. Like in Japan, they have really different methodology to teaching maths, which is more to do with patterns and things like that are more kind of abstract ways of thinking. And I think some of the kind of the Nordic countries are a lot more progressive than we are. So I think there's differences culturally as well. And when I was out in Australia, they had a lot more focus on what it meant to be part of the community as part of their education system.
Yeah.
And also they did a lot more sports, which I can understand because their sports day was like on the beach, which is a lot nicer than a muddy field in the UK. So it's like, I can understand why there's more sports. But it's definitely interesting seeing like the community side in Australia. That was something that was encouraged, that was praised, that was part of their school report, all of those sorts of things. And also doing social activities outside of work, like outside of school, was something that was encouraged for all the kids, not just the ones that... Because I think there's that financial divide in the UK as well, whereas the more affluent families can afford to take their children to after school, whether it's sports or arts and the fact that we call these things extracurricular activities is a clue, isn't it? When we're talking about after school classes in arts, in sports, we actually define them as kind of add-ons, nice to have.
Yes. And they do a lot. Parents do, they're running around the kids and
there's more than ever that kids seem to be busy with now, isn't there?
Absolutely.
All sorts.
Yeah.
It never used to. You used to just get plonked in front of the TV in like 80s, 90s and just kind of get on with it. Yeah.
But no, you're expected to like do the extracurricular to
Yeah.
round off. That's sort of, definitely.
Yeah.
And parents are expected to run around and do that as well. What amazed me was, and I think, when they first go to school and then they're sent home with homework straight away.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think that's too much as well.
Yeah.
But that's yes. Yeah, I
agree.
do understand the reading book, etc. But sometimes it was like, a lot.
Yeah, it's almost like it's drilled into us as well, isn't it? That you've got to work hard to achieve results, which doesn't really correlate with creative play and fun and exploration and authenticity and all those things that you need to be an artist.
Well, what I do like in schools now is forest school. They do forest school. I like that. Yeah. So there's certain things that they do that I think that is really good, that, you're getting people to go out and sort of outdoors type activities in a different way just from PE outdoors activities. Yeah. So we've talked about STEM versus STEAM. That doesn't mean to say that we are experts on it, because we don't really know what the current state of play is. And got here other disciplines. I think we've talked about it a little bit, haven't we? We've talked about how it affects STEM versus STEAM would affect. We think that the arts will help with other things like science or whatever. So and I think we're on to takeaways.
I've just come to a conclusion there. For me, certainly, what's made the most impact in my education and beyond my education as an artist is really, it's to do with the connection with people. So I found most value at college before I went to university, and I think probably what that was the quality of lecturers that I had there and the connection that I was able to form with them. And then when I went to university, I felt a bit more disconnected because of the whole culture thing and because of the way I think that it was taught. And that might have been differently. Would I have had a tutor that I felt a bit more aligned with? And even when we were talking about schools as well, I was thinking back to some of my school teachers, and like the subjects that I was really interested in were the ones that they kind of had a good way of explaining about things and communicating. So yeah, it's probably like the connection with people and education that's kind of stuck out for me in this conversation.
But do you think then that you need art education to be an artist?
No, not at all. No.
But that doesn't mean to say it's not good, though, does it? To have an art
No, and
education.
it doesn't say that it's not the right thing for some people. And there are a lot of good things about art education, such as we had kind of guest speakers come in, so it would really open up your perspective as to what kind of jobs that you could do and those sorts of things, and there'd be opportunities to exhibit in a supported kind of structure. So there was a lot of good things about it as well. Yeah.
So I think my takeaway is that I think if I'd have had an art education, I may have had slightly more confidence and less imposter syndrome, perhaps. But what it's made me realise, and even just talking today, is that a lot of my experiences and other types of education, which is still a sort of art education, the creative writing and everything, is a lot of that feeds my art. And I think that, and I think that is almost a realisation for me, really, that I knew that it had fed my art. I've said this before, but I think just talking today has made me really think about it.
How much it has impacted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's not just that. I think sometimes you see people, they come into a lesson, particularly when they first come, and you can almost see that they have had experience of creativity or whatever, and they say, well, I've not painted. They might not have painted, but they might have been doing something with textiles or been doing something in another creative way. And it's interesting to see how that impacts their art, and it does.
Yeah.
And so there's definitely a cross thing between one discipline and another, as we've called it.
Yeah.
And that to me speaks very strongly about having arts as a balance within the education system as well.
Yeah.
So, and I think on that note, if you haven't got anything to add,
say goodbye. We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye. See you soon.